often think to myself, like, what's next in my life? Like, how do I know what the next step is?
When we reach a point of asking yourself what is next, what is sometimes required is a new way of thinking. And the only way to think differently is to vary the input that goes into our brain. So what I mean by that is the people you spend time with. If you're always spending time with the same people, you're not going to think any different. In order to build that trust in our capability and that belief in ourselves is taking a small committed action right now. In order to build that belief, you have to have evidence that backs up that belief. We take those small steps of action and then we begin to build our confidence. And once that confidence builds and that momentum builds, that belief will begin to skyrocket. The goal, paradoxically, is not the most important achievement. What is the most important achievement is who we become in the process of the journey that we are on.
If you could leave the listeners with one big question to think about, what would it be?
Will you avoid doing what you are capable of doing in order to continue with what you are comfortable doing?
It's a big one. Okay, so Simon, a question that friends of mine and myself often, like, you know, we're sitting at the dinner table, we're bullshitting about life, and oftentimes, I don't know if I'm just getting to that age or whatever it is, but I often think to myself, like, what's next in my life? Like, how do I know what the next step is? Like, I feel like right now, maybe it's kicking off quite in a personal note, but I think it's something that maybe resonant for many. I feel like I'm doing something that's very aligned with who I am, my values, my purpose. But I have this like sense in my stomach, and I can't quite pinpoint it. I'm trying to figure out what's coming next. You know, is this for the next 5, 10, 15 years, or is there something that's coming on the horizon I don't know about? And it's a sort of gut feeling that I have that I don't really know what it is. Is this something you come across? Is it something you've explored and something you've experienced yourself?
You mean with regards to being curious as to what is next in our plan?
Yeah. And having that almost sense of unknown, of like, you know, well, what is next? Then how do you sort of know which path to take, if there is a path to take?
Yeah, I think first of all, things being unknown is actually beautiful, because when everything is unknown, anything is possible. I'll give you an example. When I first started my journey, I said to myself, I want to be a successful life coach. That's all I wanted to do. And as I started on the journey, things very quickly evolved, but not in the ways I'd imagined. So before I started, I would just say, what's next for me? Well, start my business, get some clients, and build a healthy lifestyle. That was all I had. But as I started to take steps forward with intention, suddenly I quickly discovered I was speaking, I was writing, I was doing partnerships with brands, I was doing media work, yet none of these were in my original plans. And so sometimes, yes, we do get to a point where we think, what is next? And when we're at that point, what is often required is maybe a shift in perspective or a new challenge. It can tell us that maybe we are very accustomed to what we have been doing, and we need a new challenge, something that can open our mind to other things that may be possible.
So what does a new perspective look like?
So a new perspective could be simply understanding, with the skills I've now developed to where I am today, how can I use those skills in new ways that will allow me to think more creatively and innovatively? So, for example, if I just spoke every year, it can get a bit tedious. You know, you're doing the same thing all the time. But for me, when I think about what's next, I'm also looking at macro trends. Where are people's attention going? So last year, when I did my book launch, my team put together one of the world's first book launches in the metaverse. Now that was exciting. And what's happened because of that is I'm now exploring doing more work in the metaverse and connecting that virtual world with AI. So that if somebody cannot afford to work with me one-on-one, they can work with my avatar.
Wow.
By combining AI, VR, and AR standing for augmented reality.
That's very interesting. You might have just gone on a complete tangent.
Yeah.
How are you setting that up, and what is the process around that?
So the process is working with a team that is more experienced in this.
Yeah.
They will help to build the virtual reality universe. They have already built my custom avatar. And then what we do is we sync it with ChatGPT to know how I think and the sort of content I will use. And it can be trained to respond within 40 seconds to 60 seconds when asked a question. It's very early, but it's one of the things I'm looking to explore as sort of a next step in my speaking journey.
And what sort of questions would they be asking you? Is this the what's next sort of question?
It could be anything. People could be asking me things such as, how do I get started doing what needs to be done to live a better life than where I am today? It could be things such as, what are the habits I need to start embracing to feel more successful? So it could be the typical questions that I often get asked, but I can now outsource it to AI, to the virtual world for people to interact with.
And where would they experience this? Would this be via a headset?
So ideally via a headset, but you can interact with it on your mobile or any other device such as a tablet or computer.
Amazing. I'm assuming the Apple announcement recently probably encouraged what you're doing as well.
Definitely. And I think that's where, when we go back to the question of what's next, for me, I see that as a macro level of thinking. That's what excites me as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
What is next in speaking, in writing, in my own journey, in coaching? When I look at my own journey, I'm excited about the unknown. I'm not attached about whether they happen or not. For me, it's just about planting seeds every day. Plant seeds, try things, experiment. You have no idea ahead of time which one of those things will work out.
What does that look like as a, in a day-to-day setting? What does that look like? Because I think when you're a high performer and you're an entrepreneur, you've probably struggled with these questions a lot. I know I do. I struggle with, what's next? When you've been doing something for a while, you can often start to think, it can feel, like you said, quite repetitive.
Yeah.
What does planting seeds look like without it becoming, say, a shiny object or a distraction from the thing?
Sure. So here I think there are two components. First of all, what's important is to diversify the input that goes into your mind. So often when we reach a point of asking ourselves what is next, what is sometimes required is a new way of thinking. And the only way to think differently is to vary the input that goes into our brain. So what I mean by that is the people you spend time with. If you're always spending time with the same people, you're not going to think any different. You're not going to think more creative than you have done. But if you're surrounding yourself with people doing amazing things in very different industries, what happens is your creative energy gets filled up again and again and again. And you're always going to be flush with ideas. The second part of it is thinking to yourself, well, how can I show up on a consistent basis? Now, what I mean by showing up is regularly expanding your network, expressing your ideas in the content that you produce, and documenting your journey. Because you never know who is watching. You never know who's following your journey and who could benefit from what you have to share in the world. I've had so many unexpected things happen simply by documenting my journey, putting content out there that would not have happened as a result.
And what would that look like? That would have been potentially different to what you did before. Is that going from, say, talking about life coaching and giving life coaching tips to then sharing your entrepreneurial journey? Is that one example? Or?
Yeah, so for me, some examples could be sharing videos of my speaking, sharing a video of a conversation I've had, writing an article that I've shared on my social media. And just from one of those, and I cannot pinpoint which. Yeah. And again, this is the beauty of just putting ourselves out there. We don't know which one of those things will open up a new path or open up a new step that we would not have imagined before. So from one bit of my content, a agency reached out to me and they said, Simon, we have a brand that would love to partner with you. And they would love to have some quotes and insight from your work that they can use on a campaign. And I said, let's do it, let's explore. But again, that would not have happened if it wasn't for them coming across my work.
Amazing. I think you've got a saying or a acronym. I think it's Pranoia.
Pranoia, yeah.
Pranoia. Tell us about this, because I know it went pretty viral on Instagram. I know it's pinned at the top. Talk to us about Pranoia, because I feel like this is the theory in practice.
So I'm of this belief that we live in the feeling of our thinking, moment to moment to moment. What we bring into our mind, we bring into our reality. So when you think a positive thought, you end up experiencing reality in a very positive way. When you have a negative thought, you experience reality in a very negative way. Now, what's happening here is that we forget that we are both the sculptor and the sculptor. We know the word paranoia. Paranoia is this belief that people are out there to sabotage me, whether it's a promotion I'm after. People don't want me to get the promotion, or the world is against me. I keep failing. I'm not getting to where I want to be. However, there is a word called pronoia, and pronoia means the opposite to paranoia. It is the belief that the universe is conspiring in your favor, that life is working for you and not against you. And it's not to say whether one is true and one isn't. It's simply to imagine what would happen to your life if you embraced pronoia, that everything that happens for you is in your favor. It is not working against you. When you live life through that lens, what happens is that you seek the lesson in every failure. You seek opportunity in every setback. You start to mold your experience of life in a very different way.
What's been some of the most surprising moments for you in this journey where you've not really known what's next? You've had this belief that the world is conspiring for you, and then something just shows up and you're like, wow, that wasn't even in my radar.
It happens all the time. And there's a saying I share in a book that goes, be attached to no outcome and open to everything. Be attached to no outcome and open to everything. The big mistake that people in life go through is that they attach their emotional well-being to things that may or may not happen. So they will say to themselves, when this happens, I will feel successful. When this happens, then I'll be happy. When this happens, then I will give back. When this happens, then I can do this. The downside of that thinking is what happens in the meantime. What happens in the present? Are you anxious for the future? Are you depressed? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? What's actually happening here is that you're living as if you're never going to die, and then you die having never really lived. So when we detach ourselves from the outcome and we're open to everything, we're living far more in the present. I trust that life is working for me, and so it allows me to live each day with intention, to focus on doing the best that I can in this moment. Because when you focus on doing the best that you can today, right now, the rewards will look after themselves.
Have you read the Bhagavad Gita?
No, I haven't.
You know, that's effectively the whole message from the scripture. It's you're entitled to the work, but not the fruits of your labor. Only the work, and it's the concept of just being doing the work for the work's sake and not concerned of the outcome. How do you find yourself practicing that on a day-to-day basis? Where do you find yourself thinking, I'm very attached to this? Like, have you got examples where you struggle with this?
I'm going to be honest, I used to struggle with it a lot when I first started, because I grew up in a very traditional Asian culture in which results were everything. What did you get in your maths test? What did you get in your exam results? Were you top of the class? What degree are you studying? Which company are you working in? these are very much results. These are very much outcome driven opportunities and results. For me, it took a while to let that go. To give you a good example, when I wrote my book, I already said to myself a few weeks before the publication, I'm already so grateful that I had the opportunity to write a book with Penguin. I mean, how many people get to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And second, to get endorsements from the likes of Simon Sinek, Marie Forleo, Marshall Goldsmith was already a huge win. So I said to myself, whatever happens with the book when it's published will happen. I'm not attached to what it achieves or the outcome because I'm already so blessed with where I am today.
And how did you find that translate into when the book did get published? Were you there checking the numbers? Did you find yourself emotional around it, whether it was above or below your expectation? Or
if I'm honest, not at all. I looked at the Amazon ranking to check the numbers, but it didn't concern me. And I think that when I operate at that level, I can approach the process in a far more fun and enjoyable way. So, for example, I was partnering with a Hotel de Connaught in London to put together a cocktail inspired by my book. We put together the book launch in the metaverse. I'm currently putting together an idea of a tasting course menu inspired by my book.
Oh, wow.
I'm working with an artist to create original pieces of art based on the book. I'm not attached to what happens with these projects. If they work, great. If they don't, I'll learn something. But I'm having so much fun in the process of putting these ideas together.
Amazing. At what point did you find yourself sort of release yourself from those shackles of expectations from when you were younger? Because that programming is very common in Asian culture.
Yeah.
And I think it can be difficult to sort of release. Did you find you had to do a lot of work on that? Did it happen naturally? What was the process?
I did have to do a lot of work because, as you said, I grew up with that ever since I was young. And so for a while, I would get frustrated if things didn't work out. And it would really affect me emotionally. So it was a process, it was a transition and a journey to realize that the goal, paradoxically, is not the most important achievement. What is the most important achievement is who we become in the process of the journey that we are on. It is something that most are blind to. Many people looking at what people have achieved are seduced by the results. They're living in this beautiful house. They're driving this great car. They're on the front cover of this magazine. They've achieved the #1 bestseller status. But what they're blind to is the process in the evolution of their identity and who they've had to become in the process of achieving all those results. And for me, when I understood that, I just focused on one thing: being better than who I was yesterday.
How can you keep that front of mind when you're going through the busyness of life? Because if I give this in a context that may be replicable for many of the listeners, they struggle with, one of the struggles is you lose weight, as an example. If you're losing weight as an example, lose weight, and then you struggle to keep it off. And we know keeping it off has much to do with your identity in becoming someone who values health and fitness, values having a healthy, fit body. But oftentimes the focus was only on losing the weight, and then you've just forgotten everything you've gained in the process. If you're speaking to someone who's struggled with yo-yoing, as an example, and struggled to step into that new identity of, I don't emotionally eat anymore, I don't stress eat anymore, I don't have bad habits around my food, as an example, what are some key advices you'd give?
The first thing I would say to them is do not focus on what you don't want. So don't go into the journey saying, I want to lose weight, I don't want this, I don't want that. Far better to focus on what do you want? What is the lifestyle you want? What is the identity that you want to step into? What is the vision of your lifestyle that you want to be living each and every day? Because if you focus on what you don't want, it's only going to motivate you for so long. When you focus on what you want, for example, who do you want to become in your life to achieve some of the things that you want to achieve? Now we're talking identity. And when we talk identity, you're able to continue with that lifestyle far longer than if you focus on what you don't want. So to give an example, if you operate from the identity of I am an athlete, so you now start seeing yourself as an athlete, I guarantee the choices and the actions you take will be far more powerful than if you operate from I don't want to be this anymore, or I want to lose weight. The energy is very different.
What do you think stops people from stepping into that identity? What holds them back?
What holds them back is the belief and the trust that it is possible. They have this vision of what they would like to achieve, but there's a big difference between having clarity of vision and trusting that you can get there. And it's the latter that a lot of people have a challenge with. And it's why I always say there are two sales that occur in anything that we do. The second is selling ourselves to others, and the first is selling ourselves to ourselves. And until we can sell ourselves to ourselves, the second will always remain a challenge.
It's really interesting because I'm very in business, for example. I'm very much an ideas guy, and I've always got these like different things that we could accomplish, and then I'm like, yeah, this is going to happen, but then I have to spend most of my time selling myself to the fact that yes, you can do this, because it might be like, oh wow, that I'll create it, and then I'll look at it later and be like, ooh, like is that something I can do? And I'll have to spend a lot of time selling myself on that process. So maybe break that down more. Like how because in the moment everything's exciting.
Yeah.
If you break it down, you create the vision, and then you get then you have to sell yourself. What goes into those two steps?
So there's a saying I often share that goes, plan in decades. Visualize in decades, plan in months, execute daily. Now, translating that to your question, what happens in order to build that trust in our capability and that belief in ourselves is taking a small committed action right now. So once you have that clarity of vision, in order to build that belief, you have to have evidence that backs up that belief.
Yeah.
I can say right now to you, I've got this amazing vision. I am going to achieve it. But that belief is only going to last so long if there's no evidence to back it up. But if I go, there's this incredible vision, it's exciting, it's compelling, I believe I can make it happen, and I take one small step today towards that, I take another small step tomorrow, another small step the day after, what's happening is that when I say I am going to make it happen, now I'm starting to build evidence because I'm taking the steps required to make it happen. And what happens when we take those steps, however small, forward, is we're actually building our confidence. We don't get confidence before we take an action. We take those small steps of action, and then we begin to build our confidence. And once that confidence builds and that momentum builds, that belief will begin to skyrocket.
Where do you struggle with on a day-to-day basis? You come across as a very calm, zen guy, and I love the energy. I don't know, where do you struggle?
It's a practice. I think that we all go through the roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
And for me, as with any high achiever, the greatest struggle is maintaining a healthy balance in all the things that you want to do. And as we grow older, we have more obligations. So when I started my journey, it was just myself and my girlfriend. Today, it's myself, my wife, and my daughter. And so there's a lot more obligations I have than I used to. And for me, the struggle is always maintaining a healthy balance with all the different roles and responsibilities that I have. As a speaker, as a coach, as an author, as a business owner, as a husband, as a father. These are all roles that I want to do well in.
How are you balancing the Rubik's Cube, so to speak? I think your daughter's pretty young still, right?
She turned 3 a couple of months ago.
Okay, so you're a couple of years ahead of me. So what advice would you give to me here, like who's juggling similar sorts of things and similarly has that mindset of how do I juggle those priorities, like my top 3 to 5 things I want to do and balance?
Sure. I think the first thing I've learned is that the more important the vision and the more important balance is for you, you quickly realize that you cannot get there alone. And so you have to start building a team around you. I didn't appreciate just how important that was until I became a parent. So now I have content producers, videographers, photographers, VAs, editors. I have a much bigger team around me than I had before I became a parent. Delegation and outsourcing.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd recommend tuning into?
Yeah. Planning ahead of time. We intellectually know the importance of planning, but I think once you become a parent, it's even more important to plan ahead of time. Plan the day, plan the night before, plan the week before, plan the quarter before. Because once you have an idea of what is most important, you can channel your energy in a much more intentional way.
With a 3-year-old now, I'm sure you have reflected on some things you could have done potentially better, or things that you think you did really well. What, if you were to be honest, where would you say you think, okay, Simon, I could have done this better? Looking back, obviously hindsight's a gift.
Yeah, there were a lot of things that could have been better. I mean, the first couple of years were tough, no doubt, because in April 2020, I not only became a father for the first time, I got the book deal in the same month. And in the same month, the world went into lockdown. And so raising a child in her first 2 years, where nobody could be around, her grandparents couldn't travel to be with her. She couldn't have contact with people in the outside world. And I, as her father, had to spend most of my time writing a book to meet certain deadlines. And so I couldn't be around her as much as I wanted to be. And so my wife had to take a lot more of that responsibility. And I think if COVID didn't happen, I could go somewhere with no distraction, get my writing done a lot quicker, come back and take on that father responsibility. The reality is I had to write at home with 24/7 distraction and juggle so many things at once that I couldn't be as present as I wanted to be. I would begin to write. 10 minutes later, my daughter would be crying in the other room, so I had to go and rock her to sleep. I would be back down in front of my laptop. I would be writing again for another 20 minutes. Nappy change time, and I had to go and change nappies. And so it was so difficult to balance the two during lockdown, where everything was contained in the same place, where we couldn't go outside and nobody could come into our home.
What are some values that you're trying to instill into your daughter, or that you want to instill when she's older?
So many values I would want to instill in her. I think the first one is obvious, which is to be kind to yourself and kind to others. We all talk about kindness to other people, but I think we can easily forget about being kind to ourselves. In fact, I want to encourage her to make sure that she's speaking in the same way to herself that she would to those that she cares about, because we can very quickly become our harshest critic. The second would be to embrace the mindset of an eternal student, to constantly learn, to question, and to be curious about the world around us. And the third would be patience. Not to be caught up in the instant gratification of the world that we live in, but to cultivate patience. Because when we're patient with the journey, when we're consistent with what needs to be done, then we experience the results, ironically, a lot quicker.
And how will you instill these?
Through the best way I know, through embodying them myself.
Yeah. And have any of these come from your father? Have you taken these through the generations? Or have you reviewed what you learned from your parents and thought, okay, I'm going to try and do things a little bit differently?
So a mixture, actually. So for my mum, I take empathy and kindness because her occupation was a nurse. And in her job, she naturally cared for everyone that she worked with. For my dad, it's hard work. My dad came from a very poor background. He was an immigrant into the country, but he worked hard to make life better for the family and to raise two sons when his wife and our mother passed away. And for my own journey, it's stuff like patience, learning, and giving. And these things I learned a lot through my journey as an entrepreneur.
You talked about patience a lot and detaching from the outcome. What does a long game look like for you personally?
For me, it's the fact that I've noticed since I've become an entrepreneur that too many of us give up far too early. We start a journey and we give up far too soon. The long game is about thinking in lifetimes. So when I embark on my journey as an entrepreneur, I begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey would say. And I ask myself, what would a successful life look like? What sort of impact do I want to have in the world? And what story do I want my children to continue telling about the life that I've lived? That for me is the long game. To begin with that end in mind and use it as a guide to the actions that we should take today.
And what does that look like for you?
For me, it informs how I am with others, how I interact with people, and the decisions I take today. So when I get opportunities that come my way, do I say yes to it or do I say no to it? When I'm in a dilemma or I have a choice, do I say yes to it or do I say no to it? And that is informed by the clarity of vision of what success looks like to me.
Do you mind sharing what that story is that you'd like to leave or have people talk about?
Yeah, so for me, the story is simply Simon inspired my life. He transformed the way I thought and he made me think in a new way. That was the catalyst for me beginning to live a life true to myself, not a life lived for others. Through the actions that he took, through the energy that he shared with me, he showed that anything is possible, that you can come from nothing and become something, that your mess can become your message, and that we have within us the power to own our future.
I love it. Is that something you've crafted very deliberately?
It's something I hope that people would take from what I do.
And the reason why I ask you is it sounds like you've taken a lot of time to think about these things. This is not by accident. You didn't wake up and think today, oh yeah, let me say that. How do you encourage people to carve the time out to think about these things, think about long term, and then reverse engineer and make the decisions they need to make today? Because a lot of the listeners and the audience and the example I gave earlier around losing weight, gaining it back, many of the reasons this all happens is because of bad relationships, jobs they don't enjoy, bad habits they can't let go of, mindset. And oftentimes, if you don't think about the long game, you can't make the decisions today because you don't even know what that is.
Exactly.
But how do you carve the time? And what questions do you need to be asking yourselves? Like if you were to advise someone right now to build this for themselves, what does that look like? Because I can't imagine it being something you do on the commute on the way to.
Absolutely not. And you're right, Akash. I took time to really go inward. You know, that is why one of the first things I talk about in chapter 3 of my book is that the longest journey we as humans make are the inches from our heads to our hearts.
Wow.
So many of us haven't even started making that journey. And I encourage the listeners to prioritize me time as quick as you do, to say yes to those meetings, to say yes to those social events. Start saying yes to me time. Block those out in your diary. Because if you don't, there will always be something that would take that time away from you. And then do this exercise, which is an exercise I do with all new clients that I take on board as a coach. Take out an A4 piece of paper. Imagine that your favorite magazine has written a lifetime story about your achievements. You, at 70 years old, they've decided to feature your life in this particular edition of their magazine. And I want you to write down on this A4 piece of paper what that article says about your life and your accomplishments. Spend time to write down as much as you can and simply notice what you notice.
That's something probably an iterative process as well, right? Come back to it a few times.
It is, because what happens is that as you take action, you will update that document again and again and again. And this is why this document is not do it once and I'm done. It is a living document. You will come back to it and update it, and it will change. It will evolve as you yourself evolve. But the thing is, what it gives you at the very beginning is clarity. Clarity as to what is most important and what that success looks like for you. Because success is different for all of us. But once we know what our own definition is, we awaken one of the greatest sources of energy that there is going.
Which is?
Which is that magnetic pull, a pull towards something that we want to create and manifest for ourselves. So many of us need a push. We need to be pushed or motivated to go to the gym, to wake up early, to go sleep early, to read a book, to do what must be done. But when you create something that has a magnetic charge that just pulls you forward effortlessly, you don't need motivation. You find yourself just waking up in the morning, pulled towards a future that you want to see materialize. And that is an energy that can become unstoppable.
What would your 70-year-old self say to you right now? You're speaking to me right here.
First of all, I think he would just be amazed at what has happened in my life so far. He would say to me, Simon, does this really happen? You know, do you really end up speaking in front of all of these people and hanging out with people that you've admired and been inspired by throughout your lifetime? And I think it would inspire him, that 7-year-old Simon, to realize that dreams are there for a reason. Dreams are there to show us what is possible. And when we take ownership of that journey in life, when we take ownership of our direction, magic can happen. That is the beauty of life. To manifest, to create, to give birth to things that the current us could never imagine be possible. To literally astound the person that you are today, that is the magic of life. I think my 7-year-old self would be so proud of what I've achieved.
Did you say 7-year-old?
Yeah, I thought you was a 7-year-old self. You was
70.
I was
But that was an amazing answer. But I love to, that's a really cool way of thinking about it as well.
Yeah.
But what would your 7-year-old say? 70. So you talked about the magazine, exercise. What would your skip past a couple of decades? What would they be saying to you right now as advice?
My 70-year-old self would be saying to me, that habit of consistency, it may look unsexy to a lot of people, but Simon, that has been the most powerful habit that you have embraced, that you can embrace, and that will lead to everything that you want in life. I am 70 years old now, Simon, and I can truly attest to that. I am still speaking,
Yeah.
I am still coaching, I am still writing, I am still traveling. So keep going, because if you truly enjoy what you do, it will be very difficult to retire from what you are doing.
Where do you find, where do you think the struggles with consistency come from?
It goes back to the outcome.
Yeah.
We struggle with consistency because we don't see results immediately. To use health as an example, many people will sign up to a gym at the beginning of a new year. They might go to it a lot at the beginning of the year, but then within a few months, they stop going. And the reason they lack that consistency is because they don't see results immediately. By March, they may say, where's that six pack? Where are those biceps? Where are those triceps? And then they go, oh, it's going to take too long, so I better give up now. And they lose that motivation. But here's the magic. You don't know when that six pack is going to come. You don't know when those biceps are going to pop out, but you keep going anyway. You're consistent with that journey. And there'll be a point, you don't know when, there will be a point when somebody comes up to you and they say, hey, you're looking really lean. You're looking really muscular. I bet you've got a six pack under there. That time could be 18 months, 24 months, 3 years. But when you're consistent, what happens is the results actually come very quickly, but you just don't know when. And this goes back to the fact that when we're consistent and we're patient, the results will hunt us down. The results will be seen and felt by all those around us. When you do the work internally, when you do the work in the gym, when you work on yourself, you might not see the results immediately, but in time, you will know. Why? Because firstly, you will feel it. Secondly, people can't help but notice how different you show up and how different you look.
What are some of the practices you use on a day-to-day basis that keeps you healthy, grounded, and this vision front of mind?
Plenty. First, spending lots of time with my child. She keeps me present.
Yeah, I can
she she reminds me of what is most important and the role that family plays in life. Second, it's journaling. It's taking everything on my mind and downloading onto paper. When we don't journal, we can get easily caught up in our brain. We end up thinking about our thinking, that we can get depressed, we can get anxious, and we just don't take any action. But when we download it onto paper, not only do we have greater clarity as to what that next step is, but we begin to understand ourselves better. A friend of mine, Diana Chow, she said that writing is humanity distilled into ink. And I love that because what it tells us is that if we want to become wiser humans, it begins with knowing ourselves. And thirdly, it is silence. Silence is powerful. And if there's anything I've learned, is that silence is far from empty. It is full of the wisdom and the insights that we seek. So what I do for silence is anything from spending time in nature, going for a walk, disconnecting from any devices and going for a 30-minute swim, spending time listening to a podcast, just being silent with myself and immersing myself in different environments does wonders for my thinking.
Amazing. What are some of your favorite journal prompts? Or are you a freestyle writer? How do you approach your sessions?
So I mix and match. So sometimes I use prompts and sometimes I just write down whatever comes to my mind. So psychologists might call that a stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
So I just let flow whatever comes to my mind. But when I use prompts, there are things such as, how will I know that today will have been a productive day? How can I add value into someone's life today, however small? How will I know that this week will have been a meaningful step forward towards what I want to achieve? So what that does is allows me to go inward and really explore what is important in terms of measuring my journey, but also measuring my productivity and creating some action steps going forward.
Do you have specific questions that you're wrestling with at the moment that you think that keep coming up and you're trying to figure out some of the answers to?
I would say one that is challenging but also exciting is how can I take my work and make it even more mainstream? And that's a challenging one because partly you can't predict the future.
Yeah.
And also there are unknowns that I'm not aware of in the moment. And so the obvious answer I've jotted down right now is to take my work onto television, to bring it onto platforms like Netflix and Apple and Amazon Prime. That's the obvious one. But I'm also open to the fact that there could be other paths. So that's the one I'm currently exploring and also wrestling with at the moment.
And what do you think needs to happen in order to make it mainstream?
I think it's simply greater awareness of what I do, which I think is always going to be the case for every next level.
Yeah.
You know, when it was coaching, it was how do I build great awareness of what I do? That step was speaking. And then when it was speaking is how do I build great awareness about what I do? That next step was writing a book. And then it was how do I build great awareness? Now I've got a book. Well, it was to get myself onto even bigger podcasts and shows. How is it to build bigger awareness? The next step is television. And so for me, it's knowing that next step. It's then working backwards to understand who do I need to connect with? What are the places I need to be in order to get on the radar of those people and the places that can help open the next path for me?
What would need to be for the message you have and the contents you have, especially within your book? What about it do you think needs to become simpler, more advanced, different in order for, say, mainstream to embrace it? Because we know there's obviously some things are too niche, some things need open itself naturally to a more broader audience.
Yeah. So one of the things I've been working on, and I think being on podcasts like yours, being on the media, is to take my messages, make it snappier, simple, and easy to digest. And it's something I've been working a lot on, especially with the fact I'm doing a lot more speaking. And I want to make it accessible to everyone. So I think the simpler and the easier to digest I can make it, the quicker it gets absorbed into the mainstream.
When you speak at events, what are the key messages that you always hear? Oh, that bit was really impactful for me. Do you have specific things that keep coming up as like the really relatable chunks?
So it's a great question. So I think with different events, because I can talk about different topics and different themes.
Yeah.
People will pick up on different things and they will resonate with different ideas that I share. But the one thing common in every talk I've delivered, where people come up to me and they say, Simon, I love this about what you did, was my energy. On that stage, the way I delivered, the way I connected, the way I engaged, they said, Simon, I love the energy that you had on stage. If I could have just a small percentage of the energy you have, I could go on and accomplish so much. And I think that's one of the most common things I've heard.
Wow.
The messages has been different.
Yeah.
Some people have said, this has resonated with me. I love this. I love that. But the one thing in nearly every talk I've delivered is, Simon, your energy was so on point. I went in a bit apprehensive, didn't know what to expect. I was a bit exhausted because I've had a long week, but I came out energized.
Yeah.
And just the way you delivered it, the way you came across so authentically, and the way you were all about value, and the way that you wanted to answer every single question that the audience had, it was just beautiful. And I want to know how you became that energized. So I think the energy that I had, that I have, has been so important. And it reminds me, as I talk to you now, of that famous Maya Angelou quote.
Yeah.
People will forget what you said, People will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very uplifted and energized right now, so I can attest to that. And you said all the questions that you asked in the audience. What are some of the most common questions that people come to you with? Why do people come to Simon? Like, what's your sort of speciality outside of the feeling that you mentioned, which I can completely attest to just being in the same room as you?
Sure, I think the two things that are most common when people come with questions. One is, I guess, sort of managing obstacles and challenges, personal and professional, that they will come across. So personal could be my family don't approve of the path I want to take, or there are parts of my environment I cannot change. How do I manage that? How do I find peace with that in order to pursue something that even I don't know is going to be successful? And I have a lot of critics around me. So that could be an example of a personal challenge. A professional challenge could be things such as, Simon, I think exactly the way you do. However, there are those in my organization that don't. And how do I know that if I switch role or switch company, that I've made the right decision? And so that tends to be one category of questions I often get, is how do I manage personal and professional challenges and obstacles? Secondly, I often get asked about how do I think differently? Because, you know, I don't want to be thinking the same as most people, because if I start a business in this industry or this sector, it's going to be very competitive. And even for you, Simon, you're a coach, you're a speaker, there are so many coaches and speakers.
Yeah.
How do I stand out? How do I approach it differently? How do I be creative with what I do? So those tend to be the two that I often get asked the most.
On that specific question, how have you approached that question professionally?
So with regards to challenges,
No,
or the creative,
the aspects of positioning yourself differently, because like you said, there are lots of coaches out there,
yeah,
and often the life coaching field can feel a bit of a, who's actually legitimate and who's not. I'm sure you've experienced that. So how have
Definitely.
you positioned yourself?
So for me, when people say to me, Simon, what makes you different as a coach and speaker? The first thing I say is, I'm going to be honest, in the most, not much, because at the end of the day, when I coach, I probably coach using very similar questions. When I speak, I'm pretty sure there are also some incredible other speakers out on the circuit. However, the one thing that makes me different, and we all have to have at least one thing, is that I approach things in such a unique and novel way that in many cases people would say, Simon, how did you think of that? That has never been done before. I've never seen somebody launch a book with a cocktail that I can order at a hotel bar in Mayfair. I've never seen a book launched in the metaverse. I've never seen somebody coach somebody in another city in a virtual beach with seagulls flying above their heads. I've never seen a speaker who has created an experience of speaking while people are eating a meal that you've curated for them. And so for me, it's all about creating something different that they've never experienced before, because I have such a creative way of doing what I do. Or Simon, the onboarding process of you being a coach, I've never experienced that before. You know, who has received a black box with a red ribbon, with an invitation pack and a welcome pack to the experience of being a coaching client? Simon, when you speak, I've never seen a speaker that we've booked to speak at our conference bring their photography and videography team and share all of that content with us and share in the way that you do on social media. So for me, what makes me different is how I approach what I do. Now, I'm a speaker, I'm a coach, lots of people do that. But what we can change is how we approach and how we deliver the services that we offer.
I think everyone's wondering, what's in this drink?
You will have to hop onto my YouTube channel to see the video to find out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the video's up there.
Oh, wow, wow. Is that you mixing the cocktail? And
So it is the bartender at the world's best bar,
Yeah.
which has been voted the world's best bar for 3 years in a row. And it's we worked with Jamie Oliver's production team
Oh, wow.
to shoot the video, and you'll see him mixing the cocktail. It's a beautiful shot video, and you can see the ingredients as he puts the cocktail together. And at the end, he'll present it on a copy of my book.
Amazing. Well, you have to head to YouTube to do that. I really like what you said there on doing things differently, and I think that's definitely come to light with the work that you're doing, and why you've been on so many stages recently.
Yeah.
And if people are wondering why you've been coughing every now and then, you coughed a massive speaking circuit just now.
Yeah, and there's a for the marketers listening, there's a term called UTP, which stands for unique talking points. And this is exactly what I'm trying to touch into, is that we live in a world in which people's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And so in order to capture their attention, we must have unique talking points. And when you do, what happens is you don't need a marketing team. Why? Because your viewers, your audience, your followers, your customers, they will do the marketing for you. When we had that drink at the bar and people came and they ordered that drink, can you imagine how many people were taking photos and were taking videos of that drink and sharing it on social media? How many people were talking about the fact that they were in a metaverse book launch? They were doing all the marketing for me. What unique talking points do is they get people to shout about the service and the product you offer. Yeah. So think about your business, think about your career. You don't have to run a business. You can apply it to your own personal brand within an organization. How can you create unique talking points so people can't help but want to talk about you and what you do?
I love it. Who have been some of your mentors, Simon?
So many. I've had so many mentors. I still do. Bob Burg is one that comes to my mind. He's the co-author of a book called The Go-Giver.
Yeah, I love that.
He's been a great mentor. There's another guy I want to give a shout out to, Mark Alfred Tidd, one of my first business mentors, who's now living in Australia, but he was here in the UK when I was early in my journey. Jamie Smart, the author of a book called Clarity, again, one of my first business mentors. Chris Doe over in LA, Daniel Priestley. Lots of people have been incredible mentors to me. I've learned different things from each of them that have contributed to where I am today.
Amazing. If you could leave the listeners with one big question to think about in their next journaling session tomorrow morning, what would it be?
For me, it's a question that should inspire you to take action, because I'm all about action.
Yeah.
For me, enthusiasm and ideas are common, but commitment and execution are rare. So the question I would love to leave your listeners with is this: how much longer will you avoid doing what you are capable of doing in order to continue with what you are comfortable doing?
It's a big one. Leave it there for everyone.
Indeed.
To marinate on. Thanks so much for coming on, Simon. It's been a pleasure speaking to you again. We'll put the links to your books and potentially that YouTube video in the show notes. Definitely. So people can have a little look at the cocktail that you made. But as always, an absolute pleasure. It's been really good to do this in person. I've enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing all the feedback.
Thank you so much.